Luxury Staffing, the podcast by Morgan and Mallet. The new rules of applying, AI, recruiters, and private staff in 2026.
Hello there, podcast listeners. In today's episode, on the Morgan and Mallet episode, we are going to talk with Eric. Eric is in the New York office, and in this episode, we're going to talk about the new rules of applying for jobs with AI, and this is all focused on private household staff recruitment. So, Eric, for the candidates who haven't met you yet, could you introduce yourself and give us a bit about your background? I know you worked at Google previously and what you're doing now with Morgan and Mallet.
Sure. Hi, I'm Eric. Nice to meet all of you. Previously, I was working at Google. I was a software engineer intern recruiter, so I was working with bachelor's, master's, and PhD students to land a software engineer internship at Google and trying to match those candidates with the right projects at the company. So it's a lot different than I'm doing now. For this company, I've been here a little over 2 years or close to it. I started off as an HR assistant and working in talent acquisition, so just interviewing candidates all day, every day, getting their paperwork, making sure their profiles look okay. And while I was doing that, I was giving suggestions about how to improve our internal ATS. And with these suggestions, I got the ball rolling, and eventually I have now been put in charge of making sure the ATS is continuously improving. And I'm taking feedback from candidates, I'm taking feedback from consultants, and based on this feedback, create a roadmap that I work with the software engineer to implement.
Super. And most candidates don't realize how much AI is already involved in recruitment. So when someone sends you their resume today, what actually happens to it in the first few minutes?
So in the first few minutes, it gets delivered to our ATS. Consultants could instantly start looking through candidates, even if the candidate just applied. Their resume and their application's already in our ATS. And so within the first few minutes to within the first few days, we're hoping that our consultants are going through all of the applications they receive for their roles and then either accepting or not accepting the applications based on the experience. But not only based on the experience, but based on the whole application. They're going to be looking at everything to make sure that it's a match with the client or could be a match with the client before they move forward.
And at this moment in time, that's still manually processed, right?
Yes, so everything is manually processed when it comes to reviewing an application.
Good stuff. And you said sometimes you run a candidate's notes through AI to make a more compelling summary. And what makes a resume or profile stand out when it lands on your desks, and what gets filtered out pretty quickly?
So the first thing that gets filtered out is location. So most of our clients want to hire local candidates. And this is because they want to hire someone quickly, usually. And so if someone needs to relocate, that's going to be a much longer process than a candidate that's local and can already commute. Obviously, there's some different instances of this, but that's the general gist of what happens. So the first is location. Other than that, some quick things are the amount of years of experience. We require at least, at a minimum, 3 years of experience, but we're usually looking for more than that. And a lot of times the clients are also looking for more than that. But that's a must, at least 3 years. And then another thing that's very important is seeing longevity at a position on a candidate's profile, candidate's resume. And obviously there's different scenarios and different stories that every candidate has, but if you could explain that in a good way, then it's completely okay. But clients usually want someone that they could see stayed at a job for 5+ years, because that shows that they could really mesh with a family and a household well.
Interesting. I was going to ask you, what's the ideal time frame? And you said 5 years. And Also, you said that if that longevity isn't there, that the candidate can explain. And is that explanation best done on the resume?
I would say you could add a little note about it. Sometimes there'll be a candidate that just signed a short-term contract. And so that's explainable. You could put that on your resume as the reason for leaving. But sometimes it's a lot more nuanced than that. But I will say 99% of the time, if a client sees on a candidate's resume that all of their jobs are a year or less or short term like that, they're going to ask us the exact reason why. And
Yeah.
so we need to believe the candidate's story, so we need to know the story. And so if you could explain that story well during the interview, or if there's a way to explain it on the resume, I would say doing both would do well, because we're going to have to say that to the client, the recruiter. And so we need all the information that we can get.
Super, super. And I spoke with one recruiter who was bemoaning the fact that she was getting a lot of CVs that just didn't look professional. And she was saying, like, I even wrote prompts for them. Since getting all these CVs or resumes, I've since written prompts they can use to guide them through this process. And I was just wondering, is it the same at your end? Are you seeing a lot of resumes coming through that are clearly ChatGPT or AI?
If they're ChatGPT and AI, I feel like they don't look necessarily as bad as some candidates' resumes that have one sentence on it. Or what we have a big issue is sometimes they'll upload a document that isn't even their resume and apply with that. I've seen instruction manuals. I've seen medical records that someone applied with. Sometimes they'll just submit two different photos of themselves in different poses.
Wow.
So yeah, I could understand where that consultant's what that consultant's speaking about. But I will say that very soon going forward, we're looking for solutions to this, and they'll be implemented. Maybe even before this podcast is published, they'll be implemented where they can use our application system and our website to create a professional, good resume. And so we'll get rid of a lot of those resumes that just aren't a good match at all.
Yeah, I mean, you were telling me earlier on a different episode about this new tool for the candidates. Can you just explain it again for the listeners who didn't hear the first time, please?
Yes, of course. So I actually have a meeting about this later today, so hopefully it is implemented quickly. But going forward, there's going to be two ways that a candidate can work on their resume when they apply through our website. One will be manually uploading your resume, and AI will parse it and take all the information and format it into an M&M branded resume. And so when it gets to us, it will already look professionally done like that. And then the other way is a step-by-step resume builder if you don't have a resume, or if you want to start from scratch and just create a resume that you feel like you'll be proud of and will look professional. And so with this step-by-step, there'll be AI suggestions about what you could add on your resume. You could put in your experience, and then it will also automatically format it into an M&M branded resume that we can send to the client as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Wow, that sounds great. And this tool that you built, I guess, from your own experience speaking with candidates, a lot of your knowledge and after seeing a lot of CVs, a lot of your knowledge went into the building of this, so that when the CV or resume is finished, it's got exactly what the recruiter and the client are looking for. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And we want to make it as easy as possible for candidates to apply to Morgan and Mallet. And so we're looking into every way to make it easy and to get the information that we need to match a candidate with the right client. So we're trying to facilitate a perfect match with the client, but we're also trying to facilitate a perfect match with the candidate. And so hopefully going forward with this application process, we'll make that match a lot quicker and a lot easier. It just depends on the data that we get from these applications.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, this, because I could just imagine some professions, maybe a housekeeper, a gardener, a estate manager, they will maybe touch a laptop maybe twice a week or three times a week. And that'll be maybe just to send an update, an email or whatever. And they wouldn't have the time or the interest or the experience to be geeking out with AI tools like I do personally, or maybe you do yourself, so having this tool will just be super convenient for them, and it'll just take a lot of the pain, not the pain, but the burden of, getting your CV in order and everything like that. So it sounds like a great tool.
Yeah.
And next question, you moved from Google to private households. What does a candidate coming into this industry need to understand about how different it is from corporate recruitment?
Yes. So if you're moving from corporate recruitment into a household, it's a completely different industry. What clients are looking for in resumes is completely different. On the other side of things, resumes, if you just had worked on projects on your own in the past, since I worked with software engineers, if you created an app or if you uh, did different projects with other companies, that would look really good. And they're okay seeing short-term experiences like that, or even experiences that aren't even with a company. But in this industry, like I was mentioning earlier, longevity is very, very important. And being able to show that you have at least 3 years of experience, and especially the longer you're with the family, the better your resume looks usually. And so that's completely different than it was when I was at Google. There, it was more about what coding languages you know, or how much experience do you have using different websites.
Yeah.
But this one, to get good experience, you have to be very hands-on and you have to be working with the family. And it needs to be a private family that you worked with in order to be considered a candidate.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was really surprised, but it made complete sense, like all the benefits of the longevity of having this longevity on your resume. Morgan was saying, like, the longer you're in a role, the more likely you are to get to know your client better so you can anticipate their needs. Also, it bodes well for the discretion as well. You stayed there a long term, and you're far more likely to be trustworthy if you've been there a long time. So it makes complete sense. Now, next question, for candidates worried about privacy, the photos, the personal details, the references, how does Morgan and Mallet protect that information?
We've actually been implementing more and more security in the ATS. So since we've hired the software engineer that we're working with, he's already gone in and looked into every way we can secure our ATS. And so we never release anything without letting the candidates know. And so we try to protect your data. If you're not comfortable sending anything, especially in the US, I know there's a lot of different things about that. There's no need to send anything you don't feel comfortable sending unless we're getting further and further in the recruitment process and we need to speak with your references. Before then, if you don't feel comfortable, you don't need to send your photos, you don't need to send your IDs, you don't need to send your passports in the US. Overseas, if you do send that, since I know it's a lot different over there, you can rest assured that we've done everything to secure our database. And if we're going to send any of the information, you should be notified ahead of time.
Interesting. And are there any questions candidates should ask an agency before sharing their profile?
Yes, they should ask exactly what is being shared if that hasn't been clear to them. Ask what they have on file, ask when you're going to check the references, anything that will make you feel more comfortable with the process. Most consultants will be able to help you out in that area. We want to make sure candidates are as comfortable throughout the process as possible. And so any questions the consultant you're working with should answer for you.
Super. And you believe the quality nobody talks about is the ability to think ahead, think a few steps ahead. How does a candidate actually show that in the first interview, for example?
Yes, I would say if you could give examples of thinking ahead, I've had candidates that will walk me through a whole scenario, like their client was going to has a flight tomorrow. And so the candidate will walk me through exactly what that meant to them. If they had a flight, that means they had to go get a car that will pick them up at the exact time, look at the boarding time, make sure the car will get there 2 or 3 hours ahead of time, making sure the luggage is packed for the entire family, making sure that the kids are asleep at a reasonable time the night before or kept up if they need to sleep on the flight. And so just making sure that they think about every different angle of a scenario, even if it is something that's as minor as a plane flight, which I don't know if it's super minor, but even if you have minor instances, a candidate can exemplify ways that they took this little thing and then looked at it from all the different angles to make a game plan of how they're going to help their client. And if you could demonstrate that, then it's a pretty clear indicator that you're able to think ahead and plan ahead. And a lot of clients are looking for that you're basically thinking of things that they would never think about, but will make their lives a lot easier.
Wow, great answer. Good stuff. Now, if you could give one piece of advice to a private staff candidate applying for roles in 2026 and knowing what AI is doing to the process of applying for jobs, what would that advice be?
So I spoke about this in the last episode as well, but I would say the biggest advice that I would give candidates is AI is great, and yeah, it could create resumes really quickly and make them look professional, but it's missing some human touches that you'll still need to have on your resume. And it doesn't know your exact experience like you know your exact experience unless you input it. So even if you use AI tools on our website, on ChatGPT, on Claude, on anything, before you submit your resume, I always will recommend to look it over and make sure that the experience that's listed on it is actual experience that you have. You never want to be dishonest on your resume because consultants will go through your resume and ask you about the exact experience you have. So if you have on your resume, make sure that you could speak about it confidently and honestly. Even if a consultant maybe doesn't exactly ask about a fake experience on the client probably will, or their personal assistant will. There's so many interviews you have to go through, and everyone's going to be receiving the same resume. So double check that always. Make sure it's a resume that you are 100% comfortable with and can speak to anything on it. That's my biggest advice.
Yeah, that's great advice as well, especially with at the moment with the hallucinations that LLMs do seem to inject into like the conversation, the document, the CV, whatever's been producing. So yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying before about thinking ahead, think a few steps ahead, like thoroughly read this because I am going to somebody along the way at some point is probably going to ask me. So yeah, that's solid advice there, Eric. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap this up, Eric?
Yeah, just on that same point that even if you make it all the way through to getting hired and they need you to do something that you have on your resume that you've never done, they're going to find out. And I will say principals usually don't have a lot of patience when it comes to that. And so that's always something to think about. And yeah, always be honest on your resume. Just
Wow.
period.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you very much, Eric. You've been an absolute star. Appreciate you taking the time for this interview. And for the listeners, you can subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, all the major platforms. And if you are considering going for a job, you can find them all listed at householdstaff.agency. And if you don't have the experience, you could go to Morgan & Mallet's sister site called householdstaff.jobs. And that site has lots of positions that have come from leads Morgan & Mallet have received, but did not want to take on board for whatever reason. Maybe it was like a difference of expectations or whatever. But if on that platform, there are lots of leads to help you get started with wealthy families to take on maybe sporadic jobs, and it'll help you get your foot in the door. So thank you very much for listening. And thanks again, Eric. You've been an absolute star.
Thank you so much for having me.